The centerpiece of the Thanksgiving table was a 20-pound turkey, golden brown and glistening with truffle oil, but the real main course was supposed to be my dignity. My Aunt Victoria sat at the head of the table, her fingers laden with diamonds that I knew were insured for more than my parents' entire house. She tapped her crystal goblet with a silver spoon, the sharp ding-ding-ding silencing the chatter of the 20 guests assembled in her dining hall. It was time for the annual toast of gratitude. In any other family, this would be a moment to give thanks for health or happiness. In the Hawthorne family, it was a competitive sport. It was a chance to list your assets, your acquisitions, and your quarterly bonuses, while passive-aggressively shaming anyone who hadn't made the cover of Forbes. I sat at the far end of the table, on a folding chair. They hadn't set a place for me at the main mahogany table. I was relegated to the overflow section, squeezed between a decorative fern and the kitchen swing door. I was 31 years old, but to them I was still little Jimmy, the college dropout, the dreamer, the one who threw away his potential to play around with computers in a basement while the adults did real business. Aunt Victoria cleared her throat. She smoothed the front of her Chanel dress, a prototype from her own fashion line, Victor & Co. She looked down the long table, her eyes landing on me with a mixture of pity and disgust. She said she was thankful that despite the economic downturn, her fashion empire had opened 3 new flagship stores in Tokyo. She said she was thankful for her son, my cousin Preston, who had just launched his cryptocurrency exchange, Coiner. She said she was thankful that talent ran in the bloodline. Then she paused. The room went silent. She smiled that tight, venomous smile, and she continued, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. I am thankful that we have the means to provide a warm meal for those family members who struggle. We pray that next year, James might finally find a stable job, perhaps in retail. I hear the mall is hiring for the holiday season. The table erupted in polite, cruel laughter. My Uncle Marcus, a heavy-set man who owned a massive logistics and trucking fleet, chortled. He raised his glass of scotch. He shouted that I shouldn't worry, because the world always needs people to scrub the toilets at the truck stops. Then came the mini-boss, my cousin Preston. He was 26, wearing a hoodie under a blazer, looking like every Silicon Valley stereotype rolled into one obnoxious package. He didn't just laugh, he wanted to perform. He stood up and walked over to my folding chair. He pulled out his phone, the newest model of course. He turned on the flash. "Say cheese, Jimmy," he shouted, blinding me with the light. "I'm live streaming to my followers. I'm doing a charity segment, Feed the Needy. Smile, buddy. You're going to get me so many likes." He shoved the phone in my face. He asked me to tell his followers what it felt like to be the family failure. He asked if I wanted him to Venmo me $5 for a haircut. I didn't blink. I didn't shield my eyes. I just looked at the camera lens. I asked him if his followers knew that CoinEpex was currently under investigation by the SEC for liquidity issues. Preston stopped laughing. He lowered the phone. He sneered at me. He told me to shut up. He said I was just jealous because he made more in a minute than I made in a decade. He poured a splash of his wine onto my plate, ruining my food. "Oops," he said. "Clumsy me. Enjoy the soggy stuffing, failure." He walked back to his seat, high-fiving his father. I looked down at the wine-soaked turkey. I felt the anger in my chest, but it wasn't hot. It was cold. Absolute zero. They thought I was unemployed because I didn't wear a suit. They thought I was broke because I drove a Honda. They didn't know that for the last 7 years, I hadn't just been playing with computers. I had been building Argus Capital, a private equity firm specializing in distressed assets and hostile takeovers. I wasn't unemployed. I was the shark swimming beneath their little boats. And tonight I wasn't here for the turkey. I was here for the acquisition. To understand the satisfaction of this moment, you have to understand the history. My parents died when I was 20. Victoria and Marcus were the executors of the estate. They drained it. They claimed administrative fees and legal costs until my inheritance was zero. They used my parents' money to seed Preston's first startup and to bail out Victoria's failing fashion line in 2018. They left me with nothing but student loans and a good luck card. I dropped out of college, not because I was lazy, but because I couldn't afford tuition. I taught myself algorithmic trading. I built a bot that predicted market crashes. I turned $5,000 into 50 into a million, a million into a billion. I kept my name off the headlines. I used shell companies. I stayed in the shadows. I watched them. I watched Uncle Marcus cut corners on safety inspections for his trucks. I watched Aunt Victoria use sweatshop labor to make her luxury handbags. I watched Preston run a Ponzi scheme disguised as a crypto exchange. They were leveraged to the hilt. They lived on debt, maintaining an image of wealth while their foundations rotted. And for the last 6 months, I had been quietly buying that debt. Every loan, every promissory note, every mortgage. I checked my watch. It was 8 p.m. The markets in Tokyo were opening. The margin calls were scheduled for exactly 1 minute from now. I stood up. The folding chair scraped loudly against the floor. Aunt Victoria frowned. She asked where I was going. She told me to sit down and finish my soggy stuffing before I cleared the table for the dessert course. I didn't sit. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small remote control. I pointed it at the large television screen mounted above the fireplace, the one playing a football game on mute. I changed the channel, not to a game, but to a PowerPoint presentation cast from my phone. The screen went black. Then a logo appeared in stark white letters. ARG's Capital. Uncle Marcus squinted. He asked what the hell that was. He said RG's Capital was the firm that had been harassing his CFO for weeks. I smiled. I walked to the head of the table. I stood directly behind Aunt Victoria. I spoke clearly, my voice cutting through the room. I said, "I'd like to propose a toast." Preston laughed. He yelled, "Sit down, janitor. Nobody wants to hear your toast." I ignored him. I looked at Marcus. I said, "I'm thankful for logistics, specifically the logistics of debt. You see, Uncle Marcus, when you defaulted on your fleet loans 3 months ago, the bank was going to seize your trucks. But then a nice anonymous buyer swooped in and bought the debt." Marcus went pale. He dropped his fork. I clicked the remote. The screen changed to a document. It was a transfer of ownership. I said, "That buyer was me." The room went deadly silent. I continued. I told him that as of 8:01 p.m. tonight, I was exercising the acceleration clause in his contract. Since he had missed 3 payments he skipped to buy the Bentley sitting in the driveway, the entire loan was due immediately. $40 million. Marcus stood up, his face purple. He shouted that I was lying. He shouted that I didn't have $40, let alone 40 million. My phone buzzed. I looked at it. "Check your email, Marcus," I said. Marcus fumbled for his phone. He opened his email. I watched his face crumble. The notification from his bank and the legal notice from Argus Capital were there. He slumped back into his chair, gasping for air. I turned to the mini-boss, Cousin Preston. He wasn't laughing anymore. He was staring at me, his mouth open. I clicked the remote. The screen changed to a series of server logs. I said, "I'm also thankful for cybersecurity. You see, Preston, when you built CoinEpex, you didn't build your own servers. You rented them from a hosting provider called Nebula Data." Preston's eyes widened. He whispered, No way." I nodded. I said, "I own Nebula Data, and I took a look at your traffic. It's fascinating. You're not trading crypto. You're just moving money from new users to pay off old users. It's a classic Ponzi scheme." Preston jumped up. He tried to grab the remote. I stepped back easily. I said, "Don't worry. I didn't shut down your servers. That would be rude." Instead, I forwarded the logs to the SEC and the FBI. They should be arriving, well, judging by the sirens I hear in the distance, any minute now. Preston ran to the window. Blue and red lights were flashing at the bottom of the driveway. He turned back to me, tears streaming down his face. He begged. He said he could fix it. He said we were cousins. He asked me to delete the logs. I looked at him. I asked him if he wanted to Venmo me $5 for a lawyer. Finally, I looked down at Aunt Victoria, the matriarch. She was trembling. Her hands were clutching the tablecloth so hard her knuckles were white. She whispered, "You can't touch me. My brand is global. I own my company." I clicked the remote one last time. An image of a foreclosure notice appeared on the screen. I leaned in close to her ear. I said, "Victoria, you don't own your company. You sold 40% of it to investors 5 years ago to stay afloat. You leveraged another 30% last year. And the remaining 30%? You put it up as collateral for the loan on this house." I paused for effect. I said, "I bought the investors out last week. I bought the bank loan yesterday. And this morning, I called a board meeting. You weren't invited." Victoria let out a strangled sob. She asked what I did. I told her I voted to remove CEO for gross incompetence and embezzlement of company funds. "You're fired, Aunt Victoria," I said softly. "And since this house is company property and you are no longer an employee, you're trespassing." The chaos that followed was a symphony of destruction. Preston was arrested in the foyer. He was crying, screaming for his mother as the agents cuffed him. He tried to bribe them with crypto that didn't exist. Uncle Marcus was on the phone with his lawyers, screaming that he was ruined, that they were seizing his trucks, that his life was over. He threw a glass of scotch at the wall, shattering it. And Aunt Victoria, she just sat there, the queen of the Thanksgiving table, dethroned by the boy she made sit on a folding chair. She looked up at me, her eyes red, her makeup running. She played her final card, the guilt card. She said, "James, we are family. We took you in. We fed you. How can you do this? This is evil." I looked at the lavish spread of food. I looked at the diamonds on her fingers, diamonds bought with my parents' money. I picked up her crystal goblet. I took a sip of her wine. I said, "I'm not evil, Aunt Victoria. I'm just a businessman. And I've decided to liquidate my toxic assets." I placed the glass down. I turned to the security team I had waiting in the kitchen. "My security team, clear the table," I ordered. Epilogue. 6 months later, I sat in the same dining room. The decor was different. I had removed the gaudy gold statues and replaced them with modern art. The table was set for one. My assistant walked in. She handed me a tablet. She said there was an update on the previous tenants. I swiped through the file. Uncle Marcus was driving a delivery truck for Amazon. It was poetic. The logistics tycoon, now worrying about bathroom breaks and delivery quotas. Cousin Preston was awaiting trial. He had tried to cut a plea deal by ratting out his mother, but nobody wanted her info. He was facing 10 years. And Aunt Victoria, she was working retail. Just as she had prayed for me, she was a greeter at a department store, forced to smile at customers who bought knockoff versions of the bags she used to design. I put the tablet down. My chef brought out my dinner, a simple steak, perfectly cooked. I poured myself a glass of vintage red wine. I raised it to the empty room, to the silence, to the peace. "I am thankful," I whispered to no one. I took a sip. It tasted like absolute victory.